Every story has two sides, and in Hollywood, both are usually rehearsed. For months, headlines painted Blake Lively as a woman caught in a storm of betrayal and retaliation. But the truth, buried beneath press statements, lawsuits, and leaked recordings, tells a very different story. This isn't just a feud between actors and producers, it's a cautionary tale about power, control, and the machinery behind celebrity image making. Today we're taking a closer look at how one secret audio recording turned a marketing dispute into one of Hollywood's most controversial scandals. In Hollywood, nothing stays buried for long. Every rumor, every whisper, every hidden conversation eventually finds its way into the light. And now, the calm, polished image of one of Hollywood's most adored couples, Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds, is starting to show its cracks. The internet has been buzzing ever since a secret audio recording was unsealed, allegedly exposing the tangled feud between Blake, her co-star Justin Baldoni, and Wayfarer Studios founder Steve Sarowitz. To the public, it looked like a story about workplace retaliation and harassment, but behind the scenes, it was something else entirely, a power struggle over control, image, and influence. This is the story of how Hollywood's golden image collided with corporate reality, and how a few minutes of audio may have unraveled months of carefully crafted lies. It began with a recording, an unsealed conversation between producer Steve Sarowitz and a Wayfarer team member named Claire Aub. The tape, first obtained by a Reddit user and later dissected across social media, was immediately presented by Blake Lively's legal team as the smoking gun, a sign that Sarowitz and Baldoni were orchestrating a campaign to destroy her reputation. But as analysts began to listen closely, a different picture emerged. In the recording, Sarowitz isn't plotting revenge. He's talking logistics about lawyers, press people, and managing fallout from an escalating dispute over marketing and PR. At one point, he even jokes about working harder than his team if the conflict went to court. There's no threat, no aggression, just exasperation. So, how did that conversation become evidence of harassment and retaliation? That's where the timeline begins to unravel. Blake Lively's lawsuit claimed that Sarowitz made a chilling statement that he would destroy her family with $100 million and leave 2 dead bodies in his wake. The claim implied intent, even danger. But the context didn't match. Court filings revealed that the recording took place on August 29th, weeks after the real conflict had flared, not over harassment, but over marketing control for It Ends With Us. Earlier that month, on August 12th, Blake and Ryan allegedly asked Wayfarer to release a public statement taking full responsibility for what they called a troubled production. A statement written by Blake and Ryan themselves that read more like a PR shield than an apology. It said, "We take full accountability." Blake Lively, Colleen Hoover, and the entire cast led with professionalism every step of the way. Any negativity aimed at them is ours to own. On the surface, it sounded graceful, but behind the words, it placed blame squarely on Wayfarer and its leadership, Justin Baldoni, Steve Sarowitz, and everyone connected to the studio. Wayfarer didn't agree. They saw it as manipulation, a move to make them shoulder the public backlash while Blake and Ryan protected their image. What followed wasn't a moral standoff, it was a PR war disguised as a legal one. When Sarowitz's side heard about the proposed statement, they pushed back hard. Emails flew, lawyers were looped in, and that's when the infamous audio was recorded. Sarowitz, frustrated, tells Claire that he'll protect the studio like Israel protects itself from Hamas. It's an overblown metaphor, one that later became a weapon in the court of public opinion. But to anyone listening to the full conversation, it's clear what he meant. He wasn't talking about personal attacks or physical threats. He was talking about defending his business from a publicity assault. Yet in Blake Lively's legal narrative, that same statement became something darker. Proof of a vendetta, proof that she was being punished for raising protected complaints about harassment. The irony, there's no record she ever made such complaints during that time. Instead, all evidence points to one thing: a heated fight over how It Ends With Us was promoted and who would take the fall when public backlash exploded. By the time that recording was sealed, it had already become the centerpiece of a different story, one that played far better in headlines than in court. Hollywood thrives on perception, and Blake Lively, along with Ryan Reynolds, has always been a master of that art. When their romantic comedy image began colliding with the dark tone of It Ends With Us, they shifted the narrative. Ryan's marketing team had made the movie look like a feel-good romance instead of a heavy drama about abuse and trauma. Audiences were confused, critics noticed, and when questions began to rise about the film's tone, about why Blake seemed distant from co-star Justin Baldoni, the PR team went into overdrive. They pushed for a unifying statement. They shaped a message about learning and growth, accountability, and imperfection. And when Wayfair refused to publicly take the blame, things turned hostile. Within weeks, the narrative changed again. Suddenly, this wasn't about bad marketing. It was about harassment, retaliation, and victimization. What better way to shift public empathy than to frame a business dispute as a moral one? Enter Claire Aubin, up-and-coming creative working under Wayfair. Claire was the person who recorded that conversation with Sarowitz, the same recording Blake's team later used as evidence, but here's where it gets murky. According to sources, Claire willingly handed the audio to Blake's legal team. She knew it contained no direct proof of wrongdoing, just frustration and metaphor. Yet she also knew what the media could do with selective quotes. She knew that Sarowitz was private, that he avoided the spotlight, and that by leaking this tape, she'd expose him to a kind of scrutiny few business leaders ever recover from. Why would she do it? Some speculate loyalty, others think manipulation. But the most likely reason is simpler: pressure. By that point, Blake's team had already subpoenaed phone data, and rumors spread that they were actively seeking allies inside Wayfarer. If Claire believed cooperating might protect her or her career, handing over the recording could have seemed like the safer choice. Whatever her reasons, the damage was done. When TMZ got hold of the story, the headlines were brutal. Justin Baldoni's business partner trashes Blake Lively's allegations. To readers, it sounded like a direct attack on Blake's credibility, but inside the actual recording, there was nothing of the sort. Sarowitz never insulted Blake or Ryan. The most he said was that Blake had forgotten how to be nice. Still, the story spread like wildfire. Clips were cherry-picked, quotes twisted, and what began as a conversation about marketing became the supposed proof of a smear campaign. Meanwhile, Blake and Ryan appeared unfazed. They continued to post curated glimpses of their lives, smiling for cameras, slipping into red carpet appearances, and subtly steering conversations toward empathy and awareness. Even Blake's sudden advocacy for domestic violence awareness, coming long after the movie's release, felt conveniently timed. To some, it looked like damage control disguised as activism. By the time the court discussed unsealing the audio, the arguments had shifted. Blake's team claimed it was private and sensitive, insisting that revealing it would expose a witness who had experienced verbal abuse. Wayfarer countered that the audio should be public, to show context and accuracy. When it was finally released, the supposed sensitive details turned out to be nothing. No harassment, no personal trauma, just a professional dispute over marketing and creative control. The judge, unimpressed, noted that much of the media frenzy had been fueled by Blake's own filings. Her decision to include selective quotes that sparked headlines in the first place, it wasn't just manipulation, it was strategy, and it worked. For months, public perception tilted in Blake's favor. Wayfarer was seen as the villain, Baldoni as complicit, and Sarowitz as a powerful man out to silence a woman. But when the full context came out, the illusions started to crumble. At the core of this entire feud was something simple: control. Control over image, control over narrative, control over who gets to look like the hero when the cameras stop rolling. From the very beginning, this wasn't about sexual harassment or workplace retaliation. It was about a film's marketing strategy, creative disagreements, and two different visions colliding, one driven by authenticity, the other by brand perfection. Blake and Ryan wanted to dictate the public tone of the project. Wayfarer wanted to stay true to their process. When those two forces met, both sides went nuclear, one through the courts, the other through PR, and somewhere in the middle of it all, the truth got lost. Now, months later, the dust hasn't fully settled, the lawsuits continue, the headlines fade and resurface. But one thing is clear, the unsealed audio that was supposed to destroy Wayfarer did something else. It exposed just how far Hollywood will go to protect an image. The real scandal wasn't what was said on that call. It was what was done with it. The deliberate misinterpretation, the selective leaking, the manipulation of public empathy for strategic gain. Every narrative choice, every court motion, every press post, it all served one goal, shaping perception. And in that game, truth is rarely the priority. Hollywood loves its heroes and villains, but real life isn't that simple. Behind every headline, there's a contract. Behind every scandal, a PR plan, and behind every accusation, a motive, sometimes righteous, sometimes ruthless. The story of Blake Lively, Ryan Reynolds, Justin Baldoni, and Wayfarer Studios isn't just about who said what. It's a mirror held up to an industry built on illusion. Because in the end, the real question isn't who's lying, it's who's better at selling the lie. What we see online is rarely the whole picture. In a world built on illusion, perception becomes reality. And sometimes, that's the most dangerous part of all. As this story continues to unfold, one question lingers. Was this ever about justice? Or was it always about control? If you found this deep dive eye-opening, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Not just for updates, but for the truth behind the stories that shape Hollywood. Because sometimes the biggest drama isn't on screen. It's behind it.